Okay, welcome back. Let's continue. Chapter 15, third part. Unemployment insurance. It's a government program, partially protects workers' income. When they become unemployed, increases. Uh, when they become unemployed, the government pays them. It could be a monthly payment, a yearly payment. That depends on the country's law. Generally, when you work, a part of your salary is deducted and it goes towards an unemployment insurance fund. It's basically it works like any other insurance. When you don't have a problem, you put money away. So when you have a problem, you can enjoy that money. In unemployment case, everyone who work pay a tiny fraction of their salary. It all goes into an unemployment insurance fund. So when somebody from those people who are working loses his or her job, they get to benefit the unemployment insurance. It increases frictional unemployment because, again, it gives the worker who is looking for work uh, some kind of breathing space, some time to actually look for work a little slower and better, and don't take any job because now you have access to some kind of income that you can enjoy. Qualify only the unemployed who were laid off because of their previous employers no longer needed their skills. So not everyone is qualified. You only qualify for unemployment insurance if you actually were laid off because your employer no longer needed you. So, for example, if you do something crazy or like break stuff or do something like which is your own fault and they just fire you, you could not be qualified for the unemployment insurance benefits. Unemployment insurance, 50% of the former wages for 26 weeks. Again, we're talking about the American laws. In different countries, they could have different laws. I think even in the United States, within different states, you could have different sets of rules, and this could be the federal one. It reduces the hardship of unemployment, increases the amount of unemployment. Why it does increase the amount of unemployment? Again, because it gives workers more breathing space. So workers can stay unemployed longer, look for jobs more, and don't say yes to any job opportunity because now they have access to 50% of their former wages. They're not under that hard, that much of a pressure as they would have been without any unemployment insurance. Unemployment benefits stop when a worker takes a new job. Unemployed devote less effort to to job search, more likely to turn down unattractive job offers, and less likely to seek guarantees of job security. So even you have access to unemployment insurance, you're not going to work, you're not going to look as hard as before for a job. Structural unemployment when the number of jobs insufficient. Minimum wage laws, it can cause unemployment, forces the wage to remain above the equilibrium level, higher quantity of labor supplied, smaller quantity of labor demanded. Surplus of labor, it means unemployment. Now, let's use. Okay. Before we talked about price ceiling and price floor, if you remember. First of all, remember labor is just like any other goods or services. There is a market for it. Certain people are supplying labor, people like you and me. We want to work, we're supplying our labor. And there are people who demand our labor. The companies, business owners, employers, they demand our labor. Now, if you remember from the first part a few months ago when we started talking about supply and demand, we have a labor demand, which is a demand curve, downward demand curve, and an upward supply curve. Here we have quantity of labor, that's our Q, and the price of labor. Price of labor, it means our wages, our salary. When the government intervenes and introduce a minimum wage law here, minimum wage law is the exact form of a price floor. Now we have a price floor. That means the price of labor or wages cannot go below this level. Now, what happens if when the supplier, you and me, and the consumer, those who demand labor, the company owners, we negotiate. There is like, let's say, 5 million people, and the economy is happy to employ all of them, all these companies, all the demand side. They're happy to buy all of our labor, but at the price of, let's say, $6 an hour. That would be the equilibrium wage, the equilibrium price of labor. But the government unemployment rate, I think it's $7.25 an hour in the United States. What happens is that this will not be hired. These many people won't have a job compared to the equilibrium. Why? Because below this level, for the demand side, for the companies, it's no longer profitable to employ people. This part here, this is lost because it's no longer profitable for the companies to hire us if the price level is below this. And also, there is also a second part, this part here. This part is also lost because now when price is above equilibrium, more people enter the labor force. More people are actually willing to work because now they're paying better money. For example, before that, I was just not working. I would say, okay, I'm happy. I don't want to work. But now they say that my salary would go up from $6 an hour to 7.5, $7 and a quarter an hour. So now I have more incentives to go to work. My opportunity cost of working, which is not sitting on my couch watching TV, is fixed, but now my benefits will go up. If you remember, we're all rational people. We do cost benefit analysis. So now we enter the job market. What happens now is that these many people now want to work, while the companies only hire these many people. So you have all these people here who want to work but cannot find work. Half of them because the companies don't want to hire, and the other half is because more people entered the labor force than before. This surplus here means unemployment. So this is how you define unemployment through a system of supply and demand. Because minimum wage laws act as a price floor, there are more people that the companies are ready to pay this much money to, so many of them won't find a job. In this labor market, supply and demand are balanced, and the wage equilibrium the equilibrium wage is WE. This equilibrium wage, the quantity of labor supplied and the quantity of labor demanded, both equal labor E. By contrast, if the wage is forced to remain above equilibrium level, perhaps because of a minimum wage law, the quantity of labor supplied, it will rise from LE to LS, and the quantity of labor demanded would fall to LD. Why the quantity demanded would fall? Because it's no longer profitable for people who demand our labor, for business owners, to pay us this much money. And why would the quantity supplied would rise? Because now more people have more incentives to work. They're getting paid more, so it's more attractive for them to leave their house and they just go to work. The resulting surplus, the difference between LS and LE, this difference is the unemployment, total surplus of labor. Minimum wage laws, minimum wages may be kept above equilibrium level through different tools. Minimum wage laws is only one of those tools. Another one is our unions, and also efficiency wages. Now, unions, the problem with the unions is that I don't know if you can actually call it an above equilibrium wage, because unions make workers suddenly more powerful through different means, for example, going on strikes and things like that. Unions give more power to workers. So now workers have more negotiating power when it comes to talking with their boss. Assume a situation. Right now, I'm not in a union. If I want to have a higher salary, I would just email my boss, say, "Sir, can I get a raise for next term?" Most definitely, the answer would be no. You should be lucky if we just keep you next year because of this whole coronavirus situation. But then, if I were unionized, then my union would email my boss. "Hello, on behalf of the union of blah, 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 we ask that is it possible for you to increase the salary of our members starting next semester?" Then that email carries a lot more power. Why? Because now if they say no, then you should be lucky if we keep you. Then my union may decide, again, uh, these are all done through like kind of a democratic system. Unions have elections and they elect certain representatives, and these representatives are usually older, more experienced folks who know the labor law and things like that. They may get together and think, okay, guys, you know what? We need to teach these people a lesson. We need to go on a strike. And then they would email us, every member of the union of blah, 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 you should stop working or go on a strike. Then the whole company would break down. So the companies would actually need to stop with the whole strike problem. Now we'll come back to this later when we are talking about the unions. Another thing is efficiency wages. Efficiency wages is basically companies bribing their employees for doing their jobs. It's not always the companies, sometimes a third party person which has interests in the business would bribe you, would actually pay you, not bribe, it's like would pay you a bonus to just do your job, do the job you were hired to do. I'm not a big fan of efficiency wages. Again, we'll come back to this. If the wage is kept above the equilibrium level, it will result in unemployment. In 2014, minimum wage is 7.25 per hour. 77 million workers are paid at hourly rates, about half of the labor force. About 4% reported wages at or below the prevailing federal minimum. So only 4% are being paid the minimum wage, which is, I think it's a good news. It means that most people are getting much more than minimum wage. Thus, the minimum wage directly affects about only 2% of all workers. So that's a good thing. Minimum wage workers are more likely to be female, tend to be young, tend to be less educated, are more likely to be working part-time. Over half of all workers paid at or below the minimum wage were employed in leisure and hospitality. These are tip earners, for example, restaurants and bars and things like that. Which, again, during the coronavirus crisis, this sector was actually hit really hard. So think about it. That's tragic. The proportion of hourly paid workers earning the prevailing federal minimum wage or less trended downward from 13% in 1979 to 2% in 2006. Then again, increased to 4% in 2014. Why did it increase from 2% to 4%? I would guess because of the Great Recession. The 2008 devastated the livelihood of many people. It actually made the companies unable to pay as much money as they were paying before, and many people had to actually go back to being paid at minimum wage. Minimum wage increased from 5.15 to 7.25 per hour in 2014. Also, another reason would be that the minimum wage itself went up. So, minimum wage went up, and also the economic problems of 2008. Now, unions, worker associations, bargains with employers over wages, benefits, and working conditions. Only 11% of US workers today are are unionized. About 33% were unionized in 1940 and 50. One of the reasons of this drop was because the number of uh, manufacturing jobs were actually dropped tremendously, and the share of manufacturing in the US economy dropped. Businesses now are more like the service industries. Also, there is more dynamic labor uh, movement. Like people can go and come and go a lot. When you talk about the union, these folks they know each other. They work with each other from the days they were young. They go to work for 20 years, 30 years, working at the same factory. They know each other's family. They're friends with each other. Their kids are friends with each other. Their wives and husbands are friends with each other. So this kind of, when you talk about a manufacturing, like a big factory, and thousands of people work at, it can get unionized. But now we're talking about a school, for example, like our school, and a person like me who's only here for like 4 years for a PhD program, and then he goes somewhere else. That's almost impossible to be unionized effectively. Or, for example, when you talk about the service industry, it's very hard for tip earners and restaurant owners for like 5 or 6 people who are working at a restaurant to be unionized. It's almost impossible for 6 people to have a union. But when we're talking about tens of thousands of people working for automobile manufacturers or steel manufacturers, that's a different story. Collective bargaining, process by which unions and firms agree on terms of employment. Collective bargaining, it means that now, instead of me going to my employer and negotiate on my salary, my union will also have a say. They would say, okay, we're not going to let you deal with this kid alone, let this kid deal with you alone. We're going to back him up. We're going to help him. We have more experience. We know what's going on. We know the labor laws. So you won't be able to take advantage of his experience and the fact that he's only one person. Now it's a collective you're dealing with. So they negotiate and they would put something on your contract, things like that. The strike is actually a very effective and dangerous weapon in the hands of a union. Organized withdrawal of labor from a firm by a union reduces production, sales, and profits. For example, if you turn on the news and it's about France, it's 50% strikes, 50% something else. Because in France, there are super strong labor laws that would give the unions the right to go on strike, and unions exercise this right a lot. So they would actually have a lot more power in bargaining with employers, and unions are super strong in France. Well, in the United States, not so much. Strike is very uncommon in the United States. What happens when a strike happens? Uh, it would halt production, at least reduce production. Sales, therefore, and then profits. It would really hurt the company. Union workers earn 10 to 20% more than similar workers who do not belong to unions. Again, because now they have someone who would back them up through different means. They would protect their right, they would negotiate on his behalf or her behalf. They can actually get more for him or her. Now, unions could actually end up being a very bad thing. The idea on theory is that the union doesn't want to actually hurt the company. Because if the company, if the factory goes bankrupt, then there is no job. A union just wants his workers to be paid as much as possible, not to be jobless. So a union wouldn't push with the strike so far as it would bankrupt the company. But what would happen in reality is a problem that was caused by both unions and globalization. According to my strategic management professor, what actually happened was that these big, huge companies were actually happy to deal with unions because now unions would ask for more salaries, and they would go on strikes, and these companies would use those strikes as excuse to just close down, move to another country, move to a different country. So, in fact, my professor, who was an executive manager in a big company, he said that during one of our meetings with the union, with a labor union, my boss actually told these guys that if you don't shut up, just close down the business, move it all to China, and you can't do anything about it. So you either have to shut up, or we're just going to do it. So unions can be a double-edged sword. Because if you push and push and push, after a certain point, it could actually backfire. If the company also has another option, if the factory, yes, if the factory can only produce in Chicago, yes, the factory has to negotiate with you. But if the factory can suddenly move all its machinery to another country where there is not much labor laws, and uh, labor's equilibrium wage is so low that the company can just pay like half your salary to the workers, and the workers would actually be super happy, then the story changes. So some people would actually argue that unions end up the long run hurting the interest of the worker. Union workers, but still they earn up to 10 to 20% more. Union raises the wage above the equilibrium level, higher quantity of labor supplied, smaller quantity of labor demanded. It will result in unemployment. Better off, who will be better off? Employed workers, those who are members of the union, who will be worse off? Unemployed workers, outsiders. Those who are not in that union and who want to work, But now, because of the higher salary that these unions are negotiating, the companies will not hire them. They may stay unemployed or take jobs in firms that are not unionized. Union raises wage above equilibrium. Supply of labor in industries not unionized will increase and will cause wages to go down. So my industry is unionized. I would uh, negotiate for better salaries in my industry. But what happens is that suddenly my industry won't be hiring new people because it's no longer that profitable for them. They can't fire me because if they touch me, my union will go on a strike, so they cannot fire me. They have to keep doing what they're doing. But that also means they're not going to expand that business because that new business no longer gives that much profit to them. So they would stop hiring more people. Now, more people will move to other industries. That means people, for example, assume I'm a steel worker. I'm unionized. I'm enjoying 10 to 20% more higher salary. But the company I'm working for will not invest more money in expanding the steel manufacturing because it's no longer profitable for them. What would happen next is that people will move, is that they would stop hiring in this sector and investing in this sector. They would invest their money into different sectors which are not unionized. And those who wanted to work in the steel manufacturing, they no longer have an opportunity to find work. They would go to find work in the service industry or agriculture sector, some other non-unionized sector. Now there's a much higher competition in that sector. What happens when there's much higher competition? What happens when there's higher competition? Basically, labor supply would be shifting. If you remember from our demand shifters and supply shifters, then this is a very important topic for you for your final exam. Make sure you remember this. Your labor supply curve, it would shift. In this case, when there are in my industry, labor supply curve would shift to the left. People would leave my industry and they would move to the other industries. So in other industries, labor supply curve, it will shift to the left, to the right. More people now are willing to work in agriculture and service. What happens is that we had this here, now we would have it here. More people move to other industries, their equilibrium wage would be lower, but then again, we have the minimum wage law. So what would happen in the end? The unemployment would just go up in other sectors because of that shift in the other sectors, thanks to the unions in one different sector. Supply of labor in industries not unionized will increase. It would cause lower wages. Workers in unions, they would reap the benefits of collective bargaining, while workers not in unions would actually bear some of the cost. Now, some people would actually say this is an old divide and conquer technique, like company owners actually try to pit workers against one another. That look, those guys who are unionized, they're destroying your interests, things like that. The concept of unions is a super complex, super important thing. It has many supporters, many critics, and it's like I'm in no position to give an expert view about the unions. All I can say is that, judging by my personal experience, unions are really good when the times are good. But when there is a crisis happening, unions can actually make things much worse. For example, in the textile industry, unions were really good when the industry was flourishing. They could actually, the union actually negotiated free housing, free car, even a free car for certain more experienced workers. And we got to enjoy free housing. But then when the crisis happened, the unions couldn't allow the situation to be like balanced. So they kept fighting and kept fighting and kept fighting until the whole thing collapsed and everyone lost everything overnight. So that's my personal experience with the unions. Are unions good or bad for the economy? Critics are saying unions are a type of cartel. Their allocation of labor is inefficient. High union wages reduce employment in unionized firms below the efficient level, and inequitable. Some workers benefit at the expense of some other workers. Advocates, on the other hand, would say necessary antidote to the market power of the firms that hire workers. What does market power says? Well, let's take another look on this supply and demand. One side of this the supply curve is me. One side of this market, the supply curve, is me, the average person, the little guy. The other side is the big guy, is the huge company with all an army of lawyers and labor experts and economic advisors. Honestly, when I negotiate with them, are we equal? The little guy here, am I equal to the big guy with an army of experts advising him? Oh, obviously not. So I also need someone to support me. So that's why the advocates say unions are necessary antidote to the market power, to that power that the firm has over the worker. In the absence of a union, firms pay lower wages and offer worse working conditions. Unions help firms respond efficiently to workers' concerns. They can keep a happy and productive workforce. Now, efficiency wage, above equilibrium wages paid by firms to increase worker productivity, worker health and worker turnover, worker quality and effort. That's basically, again, if I want to have a cynical definition of efficiency wage, it's basically when you're being bribed to do the job you were hired to do. But still, sometimes it's necessary. Better paid workers eat a more nutritious diet, healthier and more productive. Worker turnover can reduce turnover among its workers by paying them a higher wage, so they have more reason to stay at work. Worker quality pays a high wage, attracts a better pool of workers, increases the quality of its workforce. Worker effort, higher wages make workers more eager to keep their jobs, give workers an incentive to put forward their best effort because now they're being paid more. Before we enter this example, let me give you my own example of efficiency wages. Uh, I used to work at this agricultural transport industry, and in that industry, actually, laborers get to enjoy a certain kind of efficiency wage paid by the truckers. So when, for example, a trucker brings 10 tons of, let's say, tomatoes, you need two forklift operators and a bunch of laborers to help put the pallets on the forklift so the forklift can take them out and put them in the inventory. And this process for me, let's say I was the manager of that industry, I don't I don't have any like rush. I have like two trucks that I need unloaded into my inventory today, and they can take their time doing this. I actually, as a matter of fact, I don't want them to work too fast because if they work too fast, there is a risk of an accident. And God forbid, if there's an accident, then I'm in big trouble. If, again, God forbid, if something bad happens to one of the workers, I could be even arrested because the police would come, investigate the place. If they found some kind of mismanagement, or for example, you don't have your first aid kit ready, or you don't have your fire extinguisher system completely ready. And believe me, there's always some kind of thing that we forgot about, at least in my country. In that case, I could actually end up being arrested, end up in jail, because something that I had no control of, just because no one takes those rules super serious. So I don't want them to work too fast. I actually want them to take their time, be careful, don't make any risk. But a third party, the trucker, he wants them to do it as fast as possible. He wants to go there as soon as he parks near the dock. He wants like 5 seconds later his truck to be empty because he can go either go home or take another load and get money, get paid for it. So what happens here is that the efficiency wage as a form of a tip is being paid by the trucker. The trucker would pay our laborers something up to 50% of their salary just as a tip if they do a good job of emptying the truck super quick. That's my experience with efficiency wager. I'm not a big fan. I actually had to, like when I was there, the first thing I did was to separate the trucker from the workers because the trucker would keep pressuring them like, hey guys, if you do it really faster, I'm going to pay you like $10 more, $15 more. And they would actually either either listen to him or argue with him, things like that. It wasn't good. So the first thing I did, as soon as the truck parked on the dock, I would actually take the trucker into my own office, give him some coffee, and ask him to tell me about his trip and pretend that I actually care about his trip from um, the port to the south all the way through the desert. Like it was just desert, desert, desert. I mean, there's nothing to be told about, but he actually had a story to tell me, and I listened to his story just to keep him busy and away from my workers. So the workers wouldn't have any trouble. After they were finished, he would pay them as much tip as he wants and he would leave. That was my experience with the efficiency wages. Now we'll come back and finish this chapter.